Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stand up when everyone else sits down. Sometimes courage looks like one stranger choosing to do what's right when a whole town has chosen to look away. In Red Hollow, a paralyzed woman named Evelyn Cross sits accused of theft by men in fine suits. The sheriff won't listen, the crowd won't speak, but a mountain man named Gabe Hunter steps forward to defend her anyway. He doesn't know her. He doesn't owe her anything. He just knows wrong when he sees it. What he doesn't know is that this fragile woman once owned everything these accusers now claim. How did she lose it all, and why do they want her gone? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The high country had been good to Gabe Hunter that summer. 3 months of solitude among the pines, where the only sounds were wind through the branches and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. He'd trapped enough pelts to see him through winter, shot 2 elk for meat, and spent his evenings watching sunsets that painted the mountain peaks in shades of orange and gold that no artist could ever capture. It was the kind of peace a man earned after years of war, the kind of silence that let old memories fade into something bearable. But even mountain men needed salt, coffee, and ammunition. And so, on a warm October morning, Gabe loaded his pack, mule, and descended the narrow trail toward Red Hollow, a town he'd visited twice before and remembered as unremarkable. A place where a man could conduct his business without unnecessary conversation and be back in the high country by nightfall. The town had changed in the year since his last visit. New buildings lined the main street, a bank with ornate ironwork, a land office with fresh paint, a hotel 3 stories tall. Money had come to Red Hollow, and recently, the wooden sidewalks were crowded with well-dressed men conducting business, their voices carrying the confidence of prosperity. Wagons loaded with goods rolled past, and the general store had expanded to twice its former size. Gabe tied his mule outside the mercantile and stepped onto the boardwalk. He was a tall man, lean from months of hard living, his beard grown long and streaked with grey. His clothes were worn leather and homespun wool, practical and weathered. Among the suited businessmen and their polished boots, he stood out like a wolf among house dogs. Inside the store, he gathered his supplies with efficient silence. The proprietor, a nervous man named Simmons, kept glancing at him with poorly concealed anxiety. Gabe had seen that look before, the way townfolk regarded men who lived outside civilization's boundaries, as if wilderness itself might be contagious. "Town's grown," Gabe observed, setting a bag of coffee beans on the counter. "Yes, sir. Cattle business has been good to us." "Real good." Simmons tallied the purchases with quick fingers. Coleman Barrett brought in 2,000 head last spring, hired near about 30 men. Money's been flowing ever since. Gabe counted out coins from his leather pouch. "Barrett. That name's familiar. Owns the biggest spread in the valley now. The Barrett Ranch." Simmons leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Used to be the Cross place, but that was before the tragedy." "Tragedy?" Gabe asked, though something in him resisted the conversation. Mountain living had taught him that other people's troubles had a way of becoming your own if you listened too long. Simmons glanced toward the door, then back. Fire. 15 years back. The Cross family, good people, built this valley from nothing. They died in a fire. All except the daughter, and she... He stopped, shook his head. "Barrett took over after that. Been building ever since." Gabe collected his supplies, feeling the familiar weight of his cavalry compass in his vest pocket. He'd carried it through the war, through every decision that mattered, and it had always pointed true north. Right now, it seemed to press against his ribs like a warning. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street. Gabe loaded his mule, preparing to leave, when raised voices drew his attention toward the saloon. A crowd had gathered near the entrance, and more men were filing inside. The atmosphere felt wrong, not the boisterous energy of drinking men, but something darker, something that reminded him of army camps before a court-martial. He should leave. should climb back into his mountains where the only judgments were made by weather and wildlife. But his feet carried him toward the saloon anyway, drawn by an instinct he'd learned to trust during the war. The instinct that whispered when something evil was unfolding. The saloon had been transformed. Tables pushed to the walls, chairs arranged, in rows, facing a makeshift bar that served as a judge's bench. 50 men packed the room, their faces hard with predetermined judgment. The air smelled of tobacco, whiskey, and something else, the metallic scent of violence waiting to happen. At the bar sat 3 men who clearly held authority. The one, in. The center was massive, broad-shouldered, with a thick black beard and eyes that calculated every angle. His suit was expensive, his boots polished, his hands scarred from years of hard work before the money came. This would be Coleman Barrett. Gabe recognized power when he saw it. To Barrett's right sat a man wearing a sheriff's badge, younger than Barrett, with the lean build of someone who'd grown up using his fists. His hand rested casually on his pistol, and his eyes swept the room with the territorial awareness of a predator. The third man was older, soft around the middle, with the worried expression of someone who'd risen above his capabilities. A politician, Gabe thought. Someone who'd learned to survive by bending with stronger winds. Gabe took a position at the back of the room, near the door. Old habits from his scouting days. Always know your exits. Always position yourself where you can see everything. "Bring her in," Barrett commanded, and his voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to obedience. 2 rough-looking men emerged from the back room, pushing a wheelchair. In it sat a woman so frail she seemed almost translucent in the afternoon light filtering through the saloon windows. She wore a simple grey dress, her dark hair pulled back severely, her hands folded in her lap. But it was her face that struck Gabe. The quiet dignity there, the refusal to look away or bow her head despite the hatred surrounding her. This was Evelyn Cross. Even before anyone spoke her name, Gabe knew. There was something in the way she held herself, a bearing that spoke of breeding and education, of a life that had once meant something before circumstances crushed it down to this, a paralyzed woman in a wheelchair, facing a room full of men who'd already decided her guilt. The sheriff stood, unfolding a piece of paper with theatrical precision. "Evelyn Cross, you stand accused of theft from the Red Hollow Bank. $300 in gold coin taken from the vault on the night of October 15th. Evidence places you at the bank that evening, and this ledger page," he held up a yellowed paper, "shows your father's signature, authorizing your access to the vault, access you used for criminal purposes." Evelyn said nothing. Her hands remained folded, her gaze fixed on some point beyond the men judging her. "How do you answer these charges?" the sheriff demanded. Still, she said nothing. Barrett leaned forward, his voice deceptively gentle. "Miss Cross, your silence helps no one. Confess, return what you stole, and perhaps mercy might be shown." For the first time, Evelyn's eyes moved, finding Barrett's face. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear, educated in a way that contrasted sharply with the rough men surrounding her. "I have nothing to confess, Mr. Barrett, and we both know mercy is not what you're offering." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Barrett's expression hardened. "The evidence is clear. You were seen entering the bank after hours. The gold is missing. The ledger proves your access. What more is needed?" "A trial," Evelyn said quietly. "With a real judge, real evidence, real justice." "This is justice," the sheriff snapped. "Justice for a thief who betrayed the trust of decent people." Gabe's hand found his compass, his fingers tracing the worn brass. He'd seen this before, during the war. A woman accused by officers who wanted her land, who fabricated evidence and called it justice. That time, he'd been a young scout, too green to speak up, too afraid to challenge authority. He'd watched them hang her from an oak tree, and he'd carried that silence for 20 years, like a stone in his chest. The compass seemed to grow heavier in his hand. "She can't even walk," someone in the crowd called out. How'd she carry 300 in gold? She had help, Barrett said smoothly. Accomplices who've since fled the territory. But she was the one with access, the one who planned it. Then where's the gold? Another voice asked. Hidden, buried, spent, does it matter? Barrett's patience was fraying. She's guilty, and everyone in this room knows it. The only question is whether we're men enough to do what's necessary. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear. This wasn't a trial, it was a lynching with legal pretense. Gabe watched Evelyn. She sat perfectly still, her face composed, but he could see the slight tremor in her hands now. Fear, yes, but something else too. Resignation, as if she'd known this moment was coming and had made peace with it. The compass burned against his ribs like a brand, like a demand. He thought about his mountains, about the peace waiting there, about all the years he'd spent trying to forget the war, the violence, the impossible choices. He'd earned his solitude. He'd paid for his peace with blood and nightmares. But peace built on cowardice was just another kind of prison. Before he fully realized what he was doing, Gabe Hunter stepped forward from the back of the room. The room fell silent as Gabe's boots echoed on the wooden floor. Every eye turned toward him, this stranger in worn leather and wilderness clothes, walking with the measured stride of a man who'd crossed battlefields and lived to speak of it. Something to say, mountain man. The sheriff's hand moved closer to his pistol. Gabe stopped a few feet from the makeshift bench, his eyes moving from Barrett to the sheriff to the nervous politician, then finally to Evelyn. She looked at him with surprise, then something that might have been hope, quickly suppressed. I'm saying this isn't a trial, Gabe said, his voice carrying the calm certainty of a man stating simple fact. It's a lynching dressed up in legal clothes. Barrett's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. You're new here, friend. Don't understand how we do things. I understand fine. I've seen this kind of justice before. Gabe pulled the torn ledger page from the sheriff's hand before the man could react, examining it in the light. This paper's newer than 15 years. Ink's fresh. And you're telling me a paralyzed woman wheeled herself into a bank vault, lifted $300 in gold, and wheeled herself back out, without anyone seeing the actual theft? We have witnesses, the sheriff began, who saw her near the bank. Not in it, not stealing. Gabe set the paper down with deliberate care. Where I come from, we call that circumstantial. Not enough to convict a dog, much less hang a woman. The nervous politician cleared his throat. Now let's not talk about hanging. No one said. Didn't have to say it, Gabe interrupted, his gaze sweeping the crowd. It's written on every face in this room. You've already decided. You just want her to confess first. Make it easier on your consciences. Barrett rose slowly from his seat, his sighs seeming to fill the room. You're interfering in town business. That's unwise for a man who's just passing through. Maybe I'm not passing through anymore. Who are you? Name's Gabe Hunter. I was a scout during the war, rode with the cavalry, tracked insurgents through country that would kill most men before breakfast. I learned to read signs, the tracks people leave, the lies they tell, the stories that don't quite add up. He gestured at the evidence. And this story has more holes than a moth-eaten blanket. For the first time, Evelyn spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Hunter, you don't have to. Yes, ma'am, I do. Gabe kept his eyes on Barrett. Because if I walk out that door and let this happen, I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I stood by while innocent blood was spilled. I've done that once before. Won't do it again. The sheriff stood, his hand now openly on his gun. You're calling us murderers? I'm calling this a railroading. Big difference. Gabe's voice remained level, unthreatening, but his stance shifted almost imperceptibly, weight balanced, ready to move. Years of combat training showing through. I'm asking for what the lady requested. A real trial, real evidence. A judge who isn't sitting at the same table as the accuser. Barrett studied Gabe with the assessing gaze of a predator evaluating new prey. You have experience with the law, Mr. Hunter? Enough to know when it's being perverted. And you propose to defend Miss Cross. You a drifter with no knowledge of her character, her history, or the evidence against her. I propose that she deserves a defense. That much is guaranteed by the Constitution last time I checked. Even out here, the politician, Mayor Hutchins, Gabe had heard someone call him, shifted uncomfortably. Coleman, perhaps we should consider what? Barrett's voice cut like a blade. Letting some stranger disrupt our proceedings? We have evidence, witnesses, and a defendant who refuses to even deny the charges. She shouldn't have to, Gabe said. Burden of proof lies with the accuser. You prove she's guilty beyond reasonable doubt, not the other way around. This isn't a territorial court, Mountain Man. This is Red Hollow, and we handle our own justice. Then your justice is convenient for you and fatal for her. That's not justice. That's execution. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Some men stood, hands moving toward weapons. The atmosphere shifted from hostile to explosive in a heartbeat. Gabe felt it, that familiar tightening before violence erupts, the moment when words end and blood begins. Barrett raised a hand, and the room quieted. His control was absolute, Gabe noted. These men moved at his command like pieces on a chessboard. You want a trial? Barrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. Fine, we'll give you a trial. You have until sundown tomorrow to mount your defense. Present your evidence, call your witnesses, make your case. But when the sun sets and you've got nothing, and you won't have nothing, because there's nothing to find, Miss Cross hangs for her crimes, and you leave Red Hollow. Forever. Do we have an understanding? It was a trap, and Gabe knew it. 24 hours to unravel whatever conspiracy had put Evelyn in that wheelchair. 24 hours to find evidence in a town controlled by the man accusing her. 24 hours before they killed her anyway and ran him out of town. But it was also time. Time she wouldn't have otherwise. Time to find the truth, or at least die trying to uncover it. We have an understanding, Gabe said. Barrett nodded to the sheriff. Take Miss Cross back to her room. Keep her under watch. Mr. Hunter, you're free to investigate to your heart's content. Talk to whoever you want. Look at whatever records you think might help. But come tomorrow sundown, we reconvene here, and you present your case. And if I prove her innocence, then she goes free. Barrett's smile widened. But you won't, because she's not innocent. And tomorrow you'll understand that. Two men wheeled Evelyn toward the back room. As she passed Gabe, she looked up at him, and he saw tears she refused to let fall. Thank you, she whispered. But you've just bought us both a death sentence. Maybe, Gabe replied quietly. Or maybe I bought us time to find the truth. The crowd dispersed slowly, men filing out into the afternoon sun with disappointed expressions. They'd been cheated of their spectacle. Gabe remained in the emptying saloon, aware of Barrett watching him with cold calculation. You're a fool, Barrett said when they were alone. A noble fool, but a fool nonetheless. Been called worse. I'm sure you have. But answer me this, Mr. Hunter. Why? Why risk your life for a woman you don't know, in a town that means nothing to you? What's your stake in this? Gabe touched his compass through the fabric of his vest. My stake is sleeping at night, looking at myself in a mirror, living with my choices. Simple as that. Nothing's ever simple. There's always an angle, always a price. So what's yours? Maybe I just don't like watching the strong prey on the weak. Maybe I saw too much of that during the war and decided I was done looking the other way. Barrett studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're a dying breed, Scout. Men like you, with your codes and your honor. The world's moved on. Out here, strength makes right and the weak gets swept aside. That's not cruelty. That's nature. Nature also has consequences. Predators get old, get slow. And sometimes the prey fights back. Is that a threat? Just an observation from a man who's spent time in the wild. You learn things there. About survival. About balance. About what happens when that balance gets disrupted. Barrett's expression hardened. You have 24 hours. I suggest you use them wisely. And Mr. Hunter, stay away from my property. Stay away from my men. You're here on my sufferance, and that sufferance is limited. He walked out, leaving Gabe alone in the silent saloon. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes floating in the air like tiny stars. The room smelled of spilled whiskey and violence postponed. Gabe sat down heavily in a chair, feeling the weight of what he'd just done. He'd committed himself to defending a woman he didn't know, against accusations he couldn't yet disprove, in a town controlled by the man accusing her. He had no legal standing, no authority, and no allies. But he had 24 hours, and he'd fought longer battles with worse odds. His hand found the compass again, drawing it out to look at the brass face, worn smooth by decades of handling. The needle pointed true north, steady and unwavering. During the war, when moral clarity became impossible, when every choice led to blood, he'd learned to trust this simple tool. Not because it made decisions for him, but because it reminded him that true north existed. Even when everything else spun in chaos, he stood pocketing the compass and walked toward the back room where they'd taken Evelyn. A man stood guard outside, one of Barrett's hired hands. Young and nervous. "Need to speak with my client," Gabe said. "Mr. Barrett said no visitors. Mr. Barrett gave me 24 hours to prepare a defense. Can't do that without talking to the defendant. You want to be the one who interferes with the trial," he promised. The young man hesitated, caught between orders, then stepped aside. 5 minutes! Gabe entered a small room that smelled of dust and disuse. Evelyn sat by the window, her wheelchair positioned so she could see the street outside. She didn't turn when he entered. "You should have left," she said to the glass. "Ridden back to your mountains and forgotten you ever came here, probably." "But I didn't. Why?" She turned to face him, and he saw she'd been crying. "I'm nothing to you. Less than nothing. A stranger in a wheelchair. Accused of a crime I didn't commit. In a town where no one believes me or cares if they did. Why would you risk your life for that?" Gabe pulled up a chair and sat, meeting her eyes. They were brown, he noticed, flecked with gold in the fading light. Intelligent eyes, wounded eyes. Eyes that had seen too much and expected nothing good from the world. "During the war," he began, "I was sent to scout a rebel position in Tennessee. Found a farmhouse, woman living there alone. Officers wanted to question her, thought she might be hiding supplies, information. I knew she wasn't. Could tell just by looking. She was terrified, innocent, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I was young, and they were officers, and I stayed quiet." He paused, the memories sharp as broken glass. "They questioned her anyway, decided she was lying though she wasn't. They hanged her from her own oak tree, and I stood there with my mouth shut and my conscience screaming." Evelyn's expression softened. "That wasn't your fault." "Maybe not. But my silence made it possible. I learned something that day. Evil doesn't need good men to help it. It just needs good men to stay quiet. And I've been quiet too long, so I'm your redemption." There was no bitterness in her voice, just weary understanding. "No, ma'am. You're an innocent woman facing a corrupt trial. My redemption, if it exists, is just being man enough to say so out loud." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" "The truth, all of it. Who you are, what happened, why Barrett wants you dead. And don't leave out details thinking they don't matter. Everything matters." Evelyn looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was distant, as if recounting someone else's story. "My name is Evelyn Cross. 15 years ago, my family owned most of this valley. My father built it from nothing. Bought land when it was cheap, ran cattle, employed good men, treated everyone fairly. We weren't rich by Eastern standards, but we were comfortable, respected." She paused, her hands tightening. "Then there was a fire. Our ranch house burned in the night. My parents died. I barely survived, trapped under a fallen beam that crushed my spine. Coleman Barrett, who was our foreman then, pulled me out. Became a hero. Everyone said he saved my life. But you don't think he did. I know he didn't, because I remember, Mr. Hunter, through the smoke and pain, I remember the doors were barred from outside. I remember hearing horses riding away just before the fire started. And I remember Barrett's face when he found me, not surprised, not horrified, just calculating." Gabe felt ice settle in his stomach. "You're saying he set the fire? I'm saying my parents were murdered, and within 6 months everything we owned belonged to Barrett and 5 other men. I was 17, paralyzed in shock. They had me sign papers I didn't read, made me believe I was signing medical releases. By the time I understood, it was done. Everything gone. Why accuse you of theft now? Why not just let you fade away?" Evelyn's expression hardened. "Because 6 months ago, I started asking questions at the land office. Started looking at documents. And I found something they don't want anyone to see. What? Proof, Mr. Hunter. Proof that every land transfer was fraudulent. Proof that I'm still the legal owner of everything they've built their empires on. Proof that could destroy them all. Outside, the sun touched the horizon, painting the street in shades of blood and gold. Gabe stood, his mind already working through possibilities, obstacles, dangers. Where is this proof? Safe, hidden where they'll never find it. Can you get it to me? She shook her head. Not without putting others at risk. But I can tell you where to look for more. The land office, the county records, the survey maps. It's all there if you know what you're looking for. Then that's where I'll start. Gabe moved toward the door, then paused. Miss Cross, one more question. Do you trust anyone in this town? Anyone at all? She thought for a moment. Adelaide Morgan runs the boarding house on 3rd Street. She knew my parents was kind to me after everything. And Tobias Green at the land office. He's frightened of Barrett, but he's not corrupt. Just scared. That's a start. Gabe opened the door, then looked back. I can't promise I'll find enough to save you. Can't promise we'll win, but I promise I'll try. And I'll stand with you tomorrow, no matter what comes. Evelyn's eyes glistened. I believe you, Mr. Hunter. And that's more than anyone's given me in 15 years. He stepped into the fading light, his shadow long on the dusty street, and began walking toward the land office. Behind him, the saloon door swung shut with a sound like a judge's gavel. The clock was ticking, and he had a long night ahead. The land office sat at the corner of Main and 2nd, a squat building with barred windows, and a heavy door designed to protect the territory's most valuable commodity, paper proof of ownership. In the fading twilight, lamplight glowed from within, suggesting someone still worked inside despite the late hour. Gabe approached quietly, his boots soft on the boardwalk. Through the window he could see a thin man, hunched over a desk, carefully copying entries from one ledger to another. The man's hair was grey, his movements precise and deliberate, a clerk who'd spent decades mastering the tedious art of record-keeping. The door creaked as Gabe entered. The clerk looked up, startled, his pen leaving an ink blot on the page he'd been transcribing. He had the nervous eyes of a rabbit sensing a fox nearby. We're closed, the man said, his voice thin and reedy. Door was unlocked. I'm just finishing some work. Come back tomorrow. Gabe stepped further into the room, noting the neat rows of filing cabinets, the survey maps rolled and stored in cubbyholes, the smell of old paper and ink. You'd be Tobias Green. The clerk's nervousness intensified. Who told you that? A mutual friend, one who suggested you might be able to help me understand some property transfers from about 15 years ago. Tobias set down his pen with shaking hands. I don't know what you're talking about. And even if I did, I couldn't discuss private records with a mutual friend named Evelyn Cross. The name hung in the air like smoke. Tobias went pale, his eyes darting toward the window as if expecting watchers outside. You need to leave. Now. I need to understand what happened to the Cross family land. Need to see the original deeds, the transfer documents, the survey records. That's all public information, isn't it? Public, yes. But accessing it brings questions. And questions bring... He stopped, swallowing hard. You're the mountain man. The one who spoke up for her today. Gabe Hunter. Then you're a fool. Mr. Hunter, a dead fool if you keep pushing. But even as he spoke, Tobias was standing, moving toward a filing cabinet in the corner. His hands trembled as he sorted through keys on a ring. You're going to help me anyway, Gabe observed. I'm going to give you what you need and pray to God no one finds out I did. Tobias unlocked the cabinet, pulled out a drawer, and began extracting documents with the careful touch of a man handling sacred texts. 15 years ago, the Cross family owned 12,000 acres. The original land grant was issued to Richard Cross in 1858, purchased legally from the territorial office. He built on it, improved it, turned scrubland into productive rangeland. He spread a yellowed survey map on his desk. Gabe leaned in, studying the boundaries drawn in faded ink. The Cross property had covered most of the valley, an empire built through decades of hard work. After the fire, Tobias continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The land was divided. 6 parcels, sold to 6 different buyers within a 6-month period. All transactions handled by Barrett, acting as Evelyn Cross's legal guardian. She was 17, old enough to inherit, but the territorial court appointed Barrett as her guardian due to her injuries and, they claimed, her mental instability following the trauma. Gabe's jaw tightened. Let me guess. Barrett chose the judge, Judge Harlan Mercer. He's retired now, living in the territorial capital on a very comfortable pension. Tobias pulled out more documents, transfer deeds, each signed with Evelyn's name in a shaky, uncertain hand. These are the sales. Barrett to himself, 3,000 acres. Barrett to Sheriff Dalton, 1,500 acres. Barrett to Mayor Hutchins, 2,000 acres. And 3 other men, each receiving parcels, all of them in positions of power, or men who could be bought into loyalty. Tobias pointed to names Gabe didn't recognize. These 3 own the general store, the bank, and the biggest saloon. Together, these 6 men control every aspect of Red Hollow's economy and government. Gabe studied the signatures, the dates, the neat columns of numbers that represented the systematic theft of a young woman's inheritance. The signatures look wrong. The ink's different shades, the pressure varies. These were signed over time, not all at once. You have a good eye. They brought her papers every few weeks, claimed they needed authorization for medical care, for property maintenance, for legal fees. She signed them all, trusting the men her father had employed, the community that had known her since birth. Tobias's voice carried the weight of complicity. I processed every one of these transfers, stamped them, filed them, made them official. I knew something was wrong, but I have a family, Mr. Hunter, a wife, 3 children. Barrett made it clear what would happen if anyone questioned the transactions, made it clear how. Tobias rolled up his sleeve, revealing a scar that ran from wrist to elbow. That's from falling downstairs, according to the doctor's report. Actually from 3 of Barrett's men, convincing me that curiosity was dangerous. That was 12 years ago when I was younger and more foolish. I learned my lesson. But you're helping me now, because Evelyn Cross deserves better than what we gave her. Because I'm old enough now that cowardice has become heavier than courage. And because he pulled out one more document, handling it like precious gold. Because 6 months ago she came here and asked to see the original land grant, the one issued to her father in 1858. I showed her and she asked me to make a copy. I did, though I knew I shouldn't, and then she found something I'd never noticed. He unfolded the document, thick paper, official seals, elegant script detailing the transfer of land from the territorial government to Richard Cross. Gabe scanned the text, searching for whatever Evelyn had discovered. Look at the conditions of sale, Tobias said, pointing to a paragraph near the bottom. The land was sold to Richard Cross and his heirs in perpetuity. But here's the critical language. Said land shall remain in the possession of the Cross family line, and any transfer of ownership must be verified by territorial court with proof of willing consent by all living heirs. It's a protective clause, common in land grants of that era, meant to prevent fraud and ensure family lands stayed in family hands. Understanding dawned on Gabe. So even if Evelyn signed those transfers, they're not legal without verification by a territorial judge. Not just any judge's approval, but a formal hearing with testimony, witnesses, proof that the heir understood and willingly consented. None of that happened. Barrett had his pet judge rubber-stamp the papers, but he never held the required hearing. Which means Evelyn Cross still legally owns every acre. All the transfers are void. Exactly. And if that information became public, every deed issued in the past 15 years would be worthless. Every ranch, every business, every home built on Crossland would revert to her ownership. Barrett and his partners would lose everything, their land, their power, their wealth. Gabe straightened, his mind working through implications. And that's why they're accusing her of theft. Not to punish a crime, but to get rid of the one person who can challenge their ownership. A dead woman can't file legal claims. And a hanged thief has no credibility, even posthumously. Tobias carefully refolded the documents. "You can't take these. If they go missing, Barrett will know I helped you. But I can let you study them, take notes if you need. Just please be careful. These men have killed before. They'll kill again." Gabe spent the next 2 hours poring over records, copying key details into a small notebook he carried. The pattern became clear: a systematic conspiracy to defraud a young woman of her inheritance, executed with legal precision and backed by violence when needed. It was full dark when he finally left the land office, his mind heavy with information and his gut tight with certainty. This wasn't just theft. It was murder, fraud, and corruption woven together into a web that trapped an entire town. He walked through empty streets toward Adelaide Morgan's boarding house, hoping the second name on Evelyn's short list of allies would provide more pieces to the puzzle. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of wood smoke and distant cattle. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere else music drifted from a saloon. It was a peaceful town, built on blood and lies. The boarding house was a 2-story structure painted white, with a wide porch and flower boxes under the windows. Light glowed from the parlor, warm and welcoming. Gabe knocked, and after a moment the door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s, sturdy and sharp-eyed, with grey-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Adelaide Morgan?" Gabe asked. "Depends on who's asking and why they're asking it." Her voice carried the no-nonsense tone of a woman who dealt with difficult men and wasn't impressed by them. "Name's Gabe Hunter. I'm the fool who stood up for Evelyn Cross. I heard." She studied him with an appraising gaze that reminded him of his mother, back before the war took everything. "Well, don't just stand there letting moths in. Come inside if you're coming." He followed her into a parlor, decorated with simple comfort, handmade quilts, worn furniture, bookshelves crammed with volumes that showed signs of being read and reread. The smell of fresh bread lingered in the air. Adelaide gestured to a chair and sat across from him, hands folded in her lap. "I suppose you want to know about the Crosses, about what really happened that night. Evelyn told me some. I'd like to hear your version. My version is the truth, which nobody in this town wants to hear." She paused, her expression softening with memory. "Richard and Margaret Cross were good people. Built this valley when it was nothing but dust and dreams. Treated their workers fair, paid honest wages, helped folks through hard times. When drought hit in '68, Richard kept every man on his payroll, even though there was no work, just so their families wouldn't starve. That's the kind of man he was, and Barrett worked for him as foreman. Richard trusted him, gave him responsibility, paid him well, and Barrett repaid that trust by murdering him and stealing everything he'd built." The words came out flat, matter-of-fact, as if she'd long since exhausted her capacity for outrage. "I know it was murder, Mr. Hunter, though I can't prove it. I was one of the first to arrive after the fire started. I saw the doors, barred from outside with heavy timbers. I saw the hoofprints leading away. And I saw Barrett's face when he discovered the fire. No surprise there. Just cold calculation. Did you tell anyone?" "Told the sheriff who had the job before Dalton. Good man named Carson. He started asking questions, looking into Barrett's finances, his movements that night. 2 weeks later, Carson fell from his horse and broke his neck. Dalton took the badge and suddenly nobody was asking questions anymore. Gabe absorbed this, adding it to the growing list of crimes. And Evelyn?" Adelaide's eyes misted. "That poor girl. I watched her transform from a bright, educated young woman into what you saw today. Broken in body, nearly broken in spirit. For years she just existed, accepting charity, living in a small room, waiting to die. I tried to help, but she wouldn't accept much. Too proud even in her poverty. What changed? Why did she start fighting back? I don't know. Something inside her finally said enough. About 6 months back, she started asking questions, visiting the land office, requesting documents. I tried to warn her it was dangerous, but she just smiled and said she was tired of being invisible. Said maybe it was time people remembered the Cross name meant something, and now they're trying to erase that name permanently. They'll succeed. Do, unless you've got a miracle hidden somewhere." Adelaide leaned forward, her gaze intense. I'll tell you straight, Mr. Hunter, you seem like a decent man, and decent men are rare as gold in these parts. But decency won't beat Barrett. He's got money, power, and 6 armed men who'll kill on his command. What do you have? Gabe touched his compass, feeling its familiar weight. I have the truth. And sometimes that's enough, and sometimes it's just enough to get you killed. She stood, moving to a cabinet and pulling out a worn leather folder. But if you're determined to try, you might as well have this. It's my insurance policy. Copies of every strange thing I've noticed over the years, every inconsistency, every unexplained death. I've been keeping records, hoping someday someone would care enough to look. She handed him the folder, and Gabe opened it to find pages of neat handwriting, dates, names, observations, questions. It was the chronicle of a town's slow corruption, documented by a woman nobody would listen to. Why trust me with this? He asked. Because you stood up when everyone else sat down. Because you didn't have to, and you did anyway. And because Evelyn needs someone on her side who isn't just talking, but actually willing to fight. Adelaide's voice roughened with emotion. Those crosses were good to me when I had nothing. They gave me work, gave me dignity. I owe them. And I owe Evelyn. So if you're fighting for her, I'm with you. Whatever that's worth. It's worth more than you know, Gabe said, standing and extending his hand. She shook it firmly, her grip strong despite her age. As he left the boarding house, the folder tucked inside his coat, Gabe felt the first stirrings of hope. He had evidence, allies, and most importantly, he had the truth. Now he just needed to survive long enough to make people hear it. The moon had risen, casting silver light across the sleeping town. Somewhere in the darkness, Barrett and his men were planning, strategizing, preparing to crush this unexpected resistance. But Gabe had fought in darkness before, had tracked enemies through hostile territory, had survived when survival seemed impossible. This was just another battlefield, and he knew how to fight. Evelyn's voice, though soft, carried through the silent saloon with the weight of truth long suppressed. I was 17 years old when my parents died. The fire came in the night, sudden and fierce. I woke to smoke filling my room, to the sound of my mother screaming. I tried to reach them, but the hallway was engulfed in flames. She paused, her hands gripping the arms of her wheelchair. I made it to the front door, but it wouldn't open. It was barred from the outside. I tried the back door, same thing. Someone had locked us in. Someone wanted us to burn. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Barrett's face remained impassive, but Gabe saw the tension in his jaw. A beam fell, crushed my spine, pinned me to the floor. I lay there in the smoke, expecting to die. And then Coleman Barrett burst through the flames. Her eyes found Barrett now, holding his gaze. He was my father's foreman, a man we'd trusted. He pulled me out, and everyone called him a hero. For years I believed he was. This is slander, Barrett said, his voice low and dangerous. Unless you have proof. I have memories, Evelyn interrupted, her voice gaining strength. I remember being carried out, barely conscious. I remember Barrett's face through the smoke. No surprise there, no shock. Just cold satisfaction, like a man completing a job. I was too young, too broken to understand what I was seeing, but I understand now. She turned her attention back to the crowd. In the weeks after, while I lay in bed learning I'd never walk again, men came with papers, said I needed to sign, for medical expenses, for property taxes, for legal matters. I signed everything they put in front of me. I was 17, orphaned, paralyzed. I trusted the adults around me to help. Instead, they stole everything. Legal transfers, Mayor Hutchins said nervously. All properly notarized and recorded. Notarized by the man who gained the most from those transfers, Gabe interjected. Coleman Barrett notarized his own land acquisition. That's illegal under territorial law, and you know it, Mayor. Hutchins paled, and several men in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Gabe pressed his advantage. But let's talk about the accusation at hand. $300 in gold, allegedly stolen from the bank. Miss Cross, on the night in question, where were you? In my room at Mrs. Morgan's boarding house. I'm always in my room after dark. I can't navigate the streets in this chair after sunset. The ruts and boardwalk steps make it impossible. Can anyone verify this? I can. Adelaide's voice rang out from the back of the room. She pushed through the crowd, her face set with determination. Evelyn takes supper with me every evening at 6 o'clock. Has for the past 10 years. On October 15th, we ate together. Then she retired to her room. I saw lamplight under her door until past midnight. She never left. Mrs. Morgan is her landlady, Barrett said dismissively. Of course she'd provide an alibi. I'm also someone who has no reason to lie. Adelaide shot back. Unlike some in this room who have everything to lose if the truth comes out. Barrett's control was slipping. Gabe could see it. His rehearsed trial was becoming unpredictable. Witnesses were speaking up, and the crowd's certainty was wavering. The bank clerk testified she had access to the vault. Sheriff Dalton said, "That's evidence." "Theoretical access," Gabe corrected, "based on a 15-year-old document. But let's examine the practical reality. Miss Cross, have you ever actually been inside the bank vault?" "No. There are 3 steps leading down to it. I can't navigate steps in this chair, so she couldn't have physically reached the gold, even if she'd wanted to. And yet she's accused of stealing it." Gabe turned to the crowd, letting that sink in. "Who benefits from this accusation? Not Miss Cross, she has nothing to gain. But the men who stole her inheritance. They have everything to lose if she starts asking questions about her family's land." "This is speculation," Barrett said, his voice rising. "You have no proof of any conspiracy, don't I?" Gabe pulled the documents from his coat, the land records, the transfer deeds, the fraudulent signatures. "Here's the original land grant to Richard Cross. Note the clause requiring territorial court verification of any transfer. Here are the transfer documents. No court verification, just a signature from a judge who happened to be a friend of Barrett's. Here's the record showing Barrett notarized his own land acquisition. And here," he held up Adelaide's folder, "are 15 years of documented inconsistencies, unexplained deaths, and suspicious transfers." He spread the papers on a table where the crowd could see. Men pushed forward, examining the documents with growing interest. Sheriff Carson started investigating the fire and died in a convenient accident. The territorial surveyor who questioned the land transfers disappeared. Anyone who challenged the new order found themselves facing ruin or worse. Gabe's voice carried the authority of a man stating irrefutable facts. "This isn't a theft trial. It's an execution designed to silence the one person who can challenge the foundation of power in this town." "These documents prove nothing," Barrett said, but his voice lacked conviction. "They prove fraud. They prove conspiracy. They prove that Evelyn Cross is the legal owner of every acre her father purchased, and that every transfer in the past 15 years is invalid." The saloon erupted in chaos, men shouting, arguing, some defending Barrett, others questioning. The carefully orchestrated trial had devolved into something Barrett couldn't control. Enough. Barrett's roar silenced the room. He stood, his massive frame radiating authority. "This has gone far enough. You've presented theories and speculation, but no proof of Miss Cross's innocence regarding the theft. The gold is missing. She had motive and opportunity. That's all that matters." "Then where's the gold?" Gabe demanded. "If she stole it, where is it? You've searched her room, I assume." "She hid it, or had accomplices take it. Name them, produce evidence. You're making accusations without proof, demanding she prove a negative. That's not justice." Barrett's jaw clenched. The trial was slipping away from him, and he knew it. Gabe could see the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of options, the consideration of alternatives. Men like Barrett always had a backup plan. "Perhaps," Barrett said slowly, "we've been hasty. Perhaps Miss Cross deserves more time to produce evidence of her innocence. Sheriff, I move we postpone." "No." Evelyn's voice cut through the room. "No more delays. No more living under this shadow. If you're going to hang me, do it now. But don't pretend it's about gold or theft. Kill me for what I really am, a threat to your stolen empire." The challenge hung in the air. Barrett stared at her, this paralyzed woman who'd found courage in the face of death, and something shifted in the room's atmosphere. "She's right," a voice said from the crowd. An older rancher, one of the few independent operators left. "This ain't about theft. Never was. We all knew it, just didn't want to admit it." "Jim, you don't know what you're saying," Hutchins warned. "I know exactly what I'm saying. I remember the Crosses. Good people, and I remember thinking it was mighty convenient how fast their land got divided up after they died. Mighty convenient how Barrett went from foreman to cattle baron in under a year." Other voices joined in, the dam of silence breaking, men who'd harbored doubts for years, finally speaking them aloud. Not everyone. Barrett's core supporters remained loyal, and his hired guns stood ready. But enough dissent emerged to make a hanging impossible. Barrett saw it too, his face darkened with rage as his control crumbled. "Fine," he snarled. "You want evidence? I'll give you evidence." He gestured to one of his men, who disappeared through the back door. The room waited in tense silence until the man returned carrying a leather saddlebag. He set it on Barrett's table with a heavy thunk. Barrett opened it, revealing neat stacks of gold coins. $300. Found buried on Miss Cross's property this afternoon. Still want to claim her innocence? The room gasped. Gabe felt ice in his stomach. It was a plant, obvious and clumsy, but potentially effective. Barrett was desperate enough to manufacture evidence. Before Gabe could respond, Evelyn laughed. It was a bitter, knowing sound that cut through the tension. "My property," she said. "I don't have property, Mr. Barrett. You took it all, remember? So tell me, where exactly did you find this gold that you claim was on land I don't own?" Barrett froze, caught in his own trap. If he named a location, he'd have to explain how Evelyn, who couldn't walk and never left her boarding house room, had buried gold on land she no longer possessed. The crowd saw it too, the absurdity of the claim, the desperation of the plant. Laughter rippled through the room, nervous at first, then growing stronger. Barrett's face flushed crimson. His hand moved toward his gun, and Gabe tensed, ready for violence. But it was Mayor Hutchins who spoke, his voice trembling. "Coleman, perhaps we should reconsider. Perhaps Miss Cross deserves an investigation by the territorial authorities. The territorial authorities will say what I tell them to say." Barrett snapped, abandoning pretense. "Just like everyone in this room will do what I tell them. I own this town. I own every acre, every business, every man. And I won't let some crippled woman and a drifting nobody destroy what I've built." The mask had fallen. The careful veneer of legality stripped away to reveal the raw power underneath. And in that moment, Gabe knew they'd won, because power exposed is power diminished. And Barrett had just shown the entire town exactly what kind of man he was. The silence following Barrett's outburst was profound. Men stared at him as if seeing clearly for the first time, and what they saw made them uncomfortable. Power without pretense was uglier than most cared to acknowledge. Sheriff Dalton shifted uneasily, his hand still on his gun, but his loyalty visibly wavering. Even the hired guns along the walls seemed uncertain, paid to intimidate, but not necessarily to die for a cause they didn't understand. Barrett recognized his mistake immediately. Years of careful manipulation undone by one moment of rage. He forced his expression into something resembling calm, but the damage was done. "What I meant," he began. "We know what you meant," Gabe interrupted. "You meant that law doesn't matter when you have power. That truth is whatever you say it is. That people are property to be controlled." He turned to the crowd. "Is that the kind of man you want running this town? The kind who murders families and steals from orphans? Who frames innocent women because they dare ask questions?" "You have no proof of murder," Barrett said, his voice cold. "Accusations and insinuations aren't evidence." "Then let's talk about evidence." Gabe reached into his coat, preparing to reveal the documents he'd gathered. But before he could, the saloon doors burst open. Tobias Green stood there, breathing hard, his face pale with fear and determination. In his hands, he carried a leather-bound journal. "I have proof," Tobias said, his voice shaking but clear. "Proof of everything." Barrett went rigid. Tobias, don't. 15 years I've stayed quiet. 15 years I've watched you prosper on stolen land while she suffered. I can't do it anymore. I won't. Tobias walked forward, the crowd parting before him like water. He held up the journal. I broke into your office tonight, Coleman. Found this in your safe. Maybe I'll hang for burglary, but at least I'll hang knowing I told the truth. He handed the journal to Gabe, who opened it to find pages of careful entries in Barrett's distinctive handwriting. As he read, his blood ran cold. January 12th, 1870, Gabe read aloud. Met with Dalton, Hutchins, and the others. All agreed. Cross has too much, and we have too little. Time to balance the scales. Discussed methods. Fire seems cleanest. We'll make it look accidental. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Barrett lunged for the journal, but Gabe stepped back, continuing to read. February 3rd, 1870. Approached Judge Mercer. He'll cooperate for 20%. Sheriff Carson might be a problem. Need to handle him carefully. This is forgery, Barrett shouted. He fabricated this to— It's your handwriting, Tobias said firmly. Everyone here knows your hand. And there's more. Pages of planning, of bribing officials, of dividing the spoils. It's all there, Gabe flipped forward. March 15th, 1870. The fire was successful. Richard and Margaret dead. The girl survived, but she's broken. Mercer has granted me guardianship. Papers are ready. By summer, it will all be ours. Men in the crowd were backing away from Barrett now, horror and disgust on their faces. Even his supporters couldn't defend this. Murder confessed in the perpetrator's own hand, but as Gabe continued reading, he found something that made his heart sink. An entry from just 2 months ago, August 18th, 1885. The Cross woman has been asking questions. Tobias thinks she found the original land grant. She's been making copies, gathering evidence. Need to act before she files with the territorial court. Judge Mercer will help. He has as much to lose as we do. The old fool thinks he's safe in the capital, but I've made sure he stays loyal. Gabe looked up sharply. Judge Mercer, the territorial judge. He's part of this? Of course, Barrett said, his mask completely gone now. Did you think this was just a local conspiracy? The territorial government is as corrupt as any backwater town. Mercer has been taking bribes for decades. He'll rule however I tell him to rule. That's why you weren't worried about appeals, Gabe said, understanding dawning. Even if someone questioned the local proceedings, Mercer would uphold your version of events. Would have. Adelaide's voice came from the crowd. She held a telegram, her face grim. Just got this from the territorial capital. Judge Harlan Mercer died 3 days ago. Heart failure, they say. The new territorial judge is Samuel Brooks, known for being honest and incorruptible. The final piece fell into place. Barrett had lost his insurance policy, his guarantee that any challenge would be quashed. That's why he'd rushed this trial, why he'd been so desperate to eliminate Evelyn before she could file her claims with the new judge. You're finished, Gabe said quietly. Your judge is dead. Your conspiracy is exposed, and this entire room has heard you confess to murder. Barrett's hand dropped to his gun. I'm not finished until I say I'm finished. Sheriff, arrest this man for theft and breaking into my property. Dalton didn't move. The young sheriff's face was pale, his eyes moving between Barrett and the crowd. I can't, not after. Coleman, if what that journal says is true— It's true, Tobias said. All of it. I've been keeping records, too, copying documents, noting discrepancies. I have proof that every word in that journal matches the official records. The dates, the transactions, the bribes, it all aligns. Then arrest him. Someone shouted from the crowd, Hang him! Another voice called. The mob mentality was shifting, turning from Evelyn to Barrett. Gabe saw it happening and felt no satisfaction. This was justice, but it was also the same mindless rage that had threatened Evelyn. The crowd didn't care about truth or law. They just wanted violence against whomever seemed to deserve it. No, Gabe said firmly, his voice cutting through the rising anger. No lynching. We're not going to become what we're fighting against. Sheriff Dalton, you have a duty here. Arrest Coleman Barrett for murder, fraud, and conspiracy. Hold him for trial by the new territorial judge. Do it legal and proper. Dalton hesitated, looking at Barrett's hired guns. 20 armed men, loyal to gold if not to conscience. If this went wrong, the saloon would become a slaughterhouse. Barrett saw the sheriff's hesitation and smiled. "You think you've won, Mountain Man? You think exposing me changes anything? These men work for me. This town belongs to me. And all your evidence means nothing if everyone who knows about it is dead." His hand moved toward his gun, and the hired guns along the walls tensed. Gabe felt time slow, that familiar pre-battle clarity descending. He'd faced worse odds during the war, fought his way out of tighter corners. But Evelyn was here, trapped in her wheelchair, unable to flee, and innocent townspeople filled the room. He couldn't let this become a massacre. "Before you start shooting," Gabe said calmly, "you should know I've made copies of everything. The journal, the land records, Adelaide's documentation, Tobias's files, all of it. I sent a complete set to the territorial capital this afternoon, addressed to Judge Brooks personally. If anything happens to me or Miss Cross, he'll receive evidence of every crime you've committed." It was a bluff. Gabe hadn't had time to make copies, much less send them. But Barrett didn't know that. "You're lying, maybe, but are you willing to bet everything on that? Because if I'm telling the truth, killing us just guarantees your hanging. At least if we live, you might be able to work out some kind of deal, maybe save your neck if not your wealth." Barrett's eyes narrowed, calculating. The room held its breath. "There's another problem," Adelaide added, moving to stand beside Gabe. "While you've all been in here, I've been talking to folks outside. There are 30 townspeople surrounding this building right now. Good people who are tired of being afraid, who want to see real justice done. You start shooting in here, you'll have to shoot your way through them too, and their families, and their friends. You ready to murder the entire town?" It wasn't true. Adelaide had been inside the whole time. But the bluff worked. Several of Barrett's men glanced toward the windows nervously, and doubt crept into their expressions. Barrett stood at his makeshift bench, a man watching his empire crumble. For 15 years, he'd ruled through fear and violence. Now that foundation was breaking apart, and he had no other tools to rely on. "Stand down," he said quietly to his men. "Boss," one began. "I said stand down." Barrett's voice carried defeat. "It's over." Sheriff Dalton stepped forward, his gun drawn. "Coleman Barrett, I'm arresting you for the murder of Richard and Margaret Cross, for conspiracy to commit fraud, and for—" He paused, looking at the journal. "For more crimes than I can list right now. Put your hands up." Barrett raised his hands slowly, his face a mask of cold fury. As Dalton approached with handcuffs, Barrett's eyes found Gabe. "You've won today, Mountain Man. But you've made an enemy you can't imagine. I have friends in the territory. People who owe me favors, men more dangerous than you've ever faced. This isn't over." "For you it is," Gabe replied. "You're going to hang for what you did to the Cross family. That's justice. Everything else is just noise." Dalton cuffed Barrett and led him toward the door. The hired guns, leaderless and unpaid, melted away into the night. Hutchins sat at the bench, his head in his hands, knowing his own reckoning was coming. The crowd began to disperse, voices raised in excited discussion. The trial had become something none of them expected, not entertainment, but a moment of genuine justice emerging from corruption. Gabe turned to Evelyn, who sat in her wheelchair with tears streaming down her face. But these weren't tears of fear or despair. They were tears of release, of 15 years of pressure finally finding outlet. "It's over," he said gently. "No," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's just beginning. The land, the property, the legal battles that will take years to sort out. And Barrett still has allies, people who'll fight to keep what they took, maybe, but you're not alone anymore. And the truth is out. That's more than you had yesterday." Adelaide and Tobias joined them, both looking exhausted but relieved. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen," Adelaide said to Tobias. "Breaking into Barrett's office could have gotten you killed." "It nearly did," Tobias admitted. "His men almost caught me, but I couldn't let this continue. Couldn't let her hang for crimes she didn't commit while the real criminals prospered." Gabe extended his hand. "Thank you for finding your courage when it mattered most," Tobias shook it, managing a weak smile. I should have found it 15 years ago. Maybe things would have been different. Maybe, or maybe you'd just be dead too. Gabe looked around the emptying saloon. What matters is, you found it when it counted. That's enough. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. Stars filled the sky, infinite and indifferent to human struggles. Gabe wheeled Evelyn into the street, aware of curious eyes watching from windows and doorways. What happens now? Evelyn asked. Now you file your claims with Judge Brooks. Prove your ownership, get the transfers overturned. Won't be easy or quick, but the evidence is on your side. And you? Will you stay? Gabe looked toward the dark mountains rising to the east, where his life waited. Simple, solitary, peaceful. The life he'd built to escape memories of violence and complexity. But standing here, knowing he'd helped bring justice to a woman who'd waited 15 years for it, the mountains seemed less appealing. Less like sanctuary and more like hiding. I'll stay until this is settled, he said. Make sure Barrett and his people face real trial. Make sure you're safe. After that, he shrugged. After that, we'll see. Evelyn reached up and took his hand. Thank you, Gabe Hunter, for standing up when no one else would, for giving me back my voice, for reminding me that courage exists even in the darkest places. You had that courage all along. I just helped you remember it. They stood there in the quiet street, two people who'd been strangers yesterday, now bound by the kind of connection forged in crisis. Around them, Red Hollow slept, a town forever changed by one man's decision to say no to injustice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles. But tonight, justice had won, and that was enough. Dawn came too quickly. Gabe had spent the night at Adelaide's boarding house, sleeping in a chair outside Evelyn's room. Old military instincts warned him that Barrett's arrest didn't mean the danger was over. Wounded predators were the most dangerous kind, and Barrett had every reason to fight with whatever tools remained. The town woke to a changed reality. Word of Barrett's exposure had spread through the night, carried by witnesses who'd needed to share what they'd seen, to process the revelation that their prosperity had been built on murder and theft. Some celebrated the truth emerging. Others worried about what it meant for property they'd purchased in good faith from men who'd stolen it. Sheriff Dalton arrived at the boarding house just after sunrise, his face haggard. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. Gabe was on his feet instantly. "Barrett escaped sometime before dawn. Found the deputy unconscious, cell door open. 3 horses missing from the stable." 3, Gabe repeated. "So he didn't leave alone?" "His top men, most likely. The ones who've been with him longest, have the most to lose if he goes down." Dalton ran a hand through his hair. "I'm forming a posse, but most folks are too scared to ride after him. And honestly, I don't blame them. Barrett's a dangerous man, and now he's got nothing to lose. Where would he go?" "Could be anywhere. Mexico, the territories, Canada, or," Dalton paused, his expression troubled, "or he could come back, finish what he started. A dead woman can't reclaim property, and without Miss Cross to testify, our case against him crumbles. All we'd have is that journal, which a good lawyer could argue was forged." Evelyn appeared in her doorway, her face pale. She'd heard everything. "He's coming for me." "We don't know that," Gabe said, but his tone lacked conviction. Barrett was exactly the type to eliminate threats rather than flee them, especially threats that had cost him everything. "He is," Evelyn insisted. "You know he is. This isn't finished for him. It won't be finished until I'm dead, and his secrets are safe." Adelaide emerged from the kitchen, carrying a shotgun Gabe hadn't known she owned. "Then let him come. This is my house, and I'll defend it. We can't turn a boarding house into a fortress," Dalton said. "Miss Cross needs to be somewhere more secure. Somewhere we can protect her." "Where?" Gabe asked. "The jail?" Barrett just broke out of it. "Your office? Too many windows, too many approaches." "Church?" He shook his head. "Anywhere in town puts civilians at risk. If Barrett comes with guns blazing, innocent people will die." "Then where?" Dalton demanded. Gabe thought quickly, his military mind assessing terrain and tactical options. "My camp, up in the foothills about 3 miles from town. Defensible position, clear sightlines, limited approaches. If he wants her, He'll have to come through ground I choose. You can't carry me 3 miles, Evelyn said. Don't have to. We'll take a wagon. Adelaide, you have one? In the stable out back. But Mr. Hunter, you're talking about using her as bait. I'm talking about taking the fight away from civilians and putting it somewhere I can control the outcome. Gabe looked at Evelyn. It's your choice. Stay here and hope Dalton can protect you, or come with me and know that any violence happens away from innocent people. Evelyn met his eyes, searching for something. Reassurance, perhaps, or certainty. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her. I trust you. We'll go. Within the hour, they were loaded into Adelaide's wagon, Evelyn in her wheelchair, secured with ropes to keep it stable on rough ground, and supplies for several days if needed. Gabe drove, while Dalton rode alongside on horseback, his rifle across his saddle. I'm coming too, Tobias said, appearing with a hunting rifle and a determined expression. I helped create this mess by staying silent. Time I helped fix it. Can you shoot? Gabe asked. Well enough to hit what I aim at. And I know these hills, grew up hunting them with my father. I can be useful, Gabe nodded. Every gun helped, and Tobias had earned his place in this fight. Stay close. They left town as the sun climbed higher, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. It should have been a beautiful morning, the kind that made life seem peaceful and full of promise. Instead, it felt like the calm before a storm. The ride to Gabe's camp took 2 hours, the wagon bouncing over ruts and rocks, while Evelyn gripped the sides of her wheelchair with white-knuckled determination. She didn't complain, didn't ask them to slow down. Whatever fear she felt, she kept it locked inside. The camp was exactly as Gabe had left it, a small clearing surrounded by cottonwoods and boulders, with a creek running nearby and clear sightlines down the approach trail. He'd chosen it for solitude, but now he saw its defensive potential. The boulders provided natural cover, the trees broke up sightlines for anyone approaching, and there was only one practical way in, a narrow trail that wound through rocky terrain. They positioned the wagon in the center of the clearing, giving Evelyn protection while allowing her to see what was happening. Gabe arranged rocks and logs to create firing positions at the clearing's 3 corners, spacing them so crossfire could cover all approaches. You've done this before, Dalton observed. During the war, we called it preparing a defensive position. In civilian life, it's just good sense. Gabe checked his rifle, counting ammunition. He had 40 rounds. Not enough if Barrett brought an army, but sufficient for a skilled shooter if he made every shot count. How long do we wait? Tobias asked nervously. As long as it takes. If Barrett's smart, he'll wait for nightfall. Darkness gives him cover, makes our defense harder. But if he's angry enough, if he wants this finished quickly, Gabe scanned the tree line. He might come sooner. They settled in to wait. Dalton took the western position, Tobias the eastern. Gabe remained near Evelyn, his rifle ready, his eyes constantly moving across the terrain. Tell me about the war, Evelyn said quietly. About what made you the kind of man who does this. That's not a pleasant story. I don't need pleasant. I need understanding. Need to know why you risk your life for someone you barely know. Gabe considered refusing, but something in her voice made him relent. Maybe she needed distraction from fear. Or maybe she deserved to know who she'd placed her trust in. I was 20 when I enlisted, he began. Young, stupid, full of ideas about honor and glory. They made me a scout because I could track and ride better than most. Sent me into enemy territory to gather information, identify positions, find weaknesses. He paused, memory heavy. There was a woman. Southern sympathizer, they claimed. Officers wanted her questioned about rebel movements in the area. I went with them, watched them interrogate her. She didn't know anything. I could see it clear as day. She was just a woman trying to survive in occupied territory. But they didn't care about truth. They cared about making examples. What happened? They hanged her. From a tree in her own yard. Made me help dig the grave after. His voice was flat, emotionless, the way soldiers spoke of horrors too deep to examine. That night I understood something. That wearing a uniform doesn't make you righteous. That following orders doesn't absolve you of responsibility. That silence in the face of injustice is its own kind of crime. So you've been trying to make up for it ever since? No, I can't make up for it. She's still dead and my silence helped kill her. But I can refuse to be silent again. Can stand up when it matters, even if it costs me. Especially if it costs me. That's not redemption. It's just choosing to be better than I was. Evelyn reached out and touched his hand. You're a good man, Gabe Hunter. Better than you know. Before he could respond, Dalton's voice cut through the quiet. Movement. Southwest Ridge. 4 riders. Gabe moved to the western position, rifle ready. Through the trees he spotted them, 4 men on horseback moving slowly, studying the terrain. Barrett led, his bulk unmistakable even at distance. Behind him rode 3 hard-looking men, all armed with rifles. 4 against 4, Tobias whispered. Fair fight. No such thing as a fair fight, Gabe replied. There's only winning and losing. And we need to win. Barrett and his men stopped at the edge of effective rifle range, studying the camp. They could see the defensive preparations, the positioned shooters, the difficulty of approach. Barrett was many things, but he wasn't stupid. He knew charging in would likely get them killed. After a long moment, Barrett called out, Hunter, let's talk. Nothing to talk about, Gabe shouted back. You're a murderer and a thief. Right away now, and maybe you'll live long enough to face trial. You know I can't do that. You know I can't let her live to testify. Then you'll die trying to kill her. Your choice. Barrett laughed, the sound carrying across the distance. You think you've won, don't you? Think justice will prevail, the innocent will be protected, all the stories will have happy endings. But the world doesn't work that way, Scout. The strong take what they want, and the weak lose everything. That's natural law. That's truth. Truth is what you confess to in your own journal. Truth is 15 years of crimes catching up with you. Truth is a paralyzed woman proving stronger than the man who tried to break her. Strength is measured in results, not intentions. And the result of today will be her death and your failure. You can't protect her forever. Eventually you'll sleep. Eventually you'll make a mistake. And when you do, I'll be there. Not if you're dead, Dalton called out. This is Sheriff Dalton, Barrett. I'm ordering you to surrender. Face trial like a man instead of running like a coward. Dalton, Barrett's voice dripped with contempt. The boy who took Carson's badge and did whatever I told him. You think wearing that star makes you something more than my puppet? You've been bought and paid for since the day you pinned it on. Maybe I was. But I'm done being bought. Dalton's voice was steady now, certain. I'm done looking the other way while you destroy this town. So surrender or start shooting. Either way, this ends today. The standoff stretched. Gabe watched Barrett conferring with his men, pointing at various approaches, planning strategy. They were preparing to attack, looking for weaknesses in the defense. They're coming, Gabe said quietly. Get ready. How do you know? Tobias asked, because Barrett can't afford to wait. Every hour that passes, more evidence reaches the territorial capital. More witnesses find courage to speak. His only chance is to eliminate the primary threat, Evelyn, and hope the case falls apart without her testimony. Then why doesn't he just attack? Because he's weighing odds, looking for the best approach. But he'll move soon. Men like him always do. As if in response to Gabe's words, Barrett and his men spurred their horses, splitting up and moving to surround the clearing. They stayed outside rifle range, but close enough to press an attack when ready. They're trying to divide our attention, Dalton observed. Make us watch 4 directions at once. Standard cavalry tactics. Keep the enemy guessing which point will be the main assault. Gabe moved back to the center, where he could respond to any direction. Stay calm. Pick your targets. Don't waste ammunition. And remember, we're not trying to kill them. Just trying to convince them that continuing isn't worth the cost. Speak for yourself. Adelaide's voice startled them. She'd followed the wagon on horseback, armed with her shotgun and a fierce expression. That man murdered the best people I ever knew. I'm fine with killing him. Adelaide, you shouldn't be here, Gabe said. My house, my wagon, my shotgun. I'll be wherever I damn well please. She took position near Evelyn, making it clear she'd be the last line of defense if the others fell. Gabe wanted to argue but recognized the futility. Some battles weren't worth fighting, and Adelaide's determination might actually help. One more gun, one more ally. The sun climbed toward noon, heat building, tension thick as smoke. Barrett's men circled like wolves, looking for weakness, testing responses. Gabe knew this phase. The psychological warfare before violence, the attempt to break nerves and cause mistakes. How long can we hold here? Evelyn asked quietly. As long as we need to. We have water, some food, ammunition, and our position is strong. Barrett's the one under time pressure. Will he really try to kill us all? He'll try. Whether he'll succeed is another question. Gabe checked his rifle again, more for something to do than necessity. But I promise you this, if he wants you dead, he'll have to go through me first. And I'm not an easy man to go through, I know. That's why I trust you. The attack, when it came, was sudden and coordinated. 3 of Barrett's men charged from different directions simultaneously, while Barrett himself provided covering fire from the tree line. It was a good tactic. Divide the defenders' attention, overwhelm their ability to respond. But Gabe had fought in worse situations, had faced enemy charges in terrain much less favorable. His rifle came up smoothly, and he fired with the calm precision of a man who'd done this before. The battle for Red Hollow's soul had begun. Gabe's first shot caught one of the charging riders in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. Not a killing shot. He still avoided that when possible, but effective. The man hit the ground hard and didn't rise. Dalton's rifle cracked twice in rapid succession. The first shot went wide, but the second found its mark, striking another attacker's horse. The animal went down screaming, throwing its rider, who rolled behind cover. Tobias fired 3 times, his shots going high in his nervousness. But his presence alone was valuable, forcing Barrett's men to account for another gun, another angle of fire. Adelaide waited. Her shotgun useless at this range, but ready if anyone breached the inner perimeter. Barrett's covering fire forced them all to keep their heads down. He was positioned well, using a boulder for protection, while his shots chipped stone and wood around the defenders. Not trying to kill, just trying to suppress, to keep them from effectively targeting his men. The second wave came from a different direction. 2 men on foot now, using the trees for cover, advancing in short rushes, while Barrett continued his suppressing fire. They were coordinating well, and Gabe recognized military training in their movements. These weren't just hired thugs. They were experienced fighters. Dalton, left side. Gabe called, sighting on one of the advancing men. He led the target slightly, squeezed the trigger, and watched the man stumble and fall behind a log. Hit or spooked, Gabe couldn't tell. Tobias was reloading with shaking hands. I'm not a fighter. You're doing fine. Just keep shooting. Don't have to hit anyone. Just make them think twice about advancing. The man Dalton had unhorsed made a desperate run toward the wagon, probably thinking Evelyn was an easy target. Adelaide's shotgun roared, both barrels. At close range, the blast caught him full in the chest, and he went down without a sound. Adelaide calmly broke open the shotgun and reloaded, her face set like stone. One less murderer in the world. The attackers fell back, regrouping. They'd learned that charging the camp wouldn't work, that the defense was too strong. Now they'd try something else. Siege tactics, perhaps, or waiting for nightfall when darkness would give them advantage. But Gabe knew they couldn't wait. Every minute that passed brought more risk of Barrett escaping permanently, more chance of reinforcements arriving for either side. This needed to end now, decisively. I'm going after Barrett, he said. That's suicide, Dalton protested. You leave this position, you lose all its advantages. Not if I can flank him. Come at him from an angle he's not watching. Gabe studied the terrain, identifying a route through the trees that would put him behind Barrett's position. Risky but possible. You 3 hold here. Keep them focused on the camp. I'll circle around and end this, and if you fail... Evelyn asked, her voice tight with worry. Then Dalton gets you to the territorial capital. Tells Judge Brooks everything. Make sure the truth survives even if we don't. Before anyone could argue further, Gabe moved. He slipped from the clearing into the forest, using every skill learned during years of scouting. Staying low, using shadows, moving with the wind so his approach made no sound. His rifle was slung across his back, his pistol drawn for close quarters work. The forest was quiet except for distant birdsong and the rustle of leaves. Beautiful country, peaceful. Strange setting for violence. He circled wide, giving Barrett's position plenty of space, approaching from the north where heavy brush would mask his movement. Through gaps in the trees, he could see Barrett still firing occasionally at the camp, keeping the defenders pinned while his remaining men looked for openings. Gabe closed the distance carefully. 50 yards, 40, 30. Barrett must have sensed something, a sound, a movement, some instinct that warned of danger. He turned just as Gabe emerged from cover, their eyes meeting across 20 yards of open ground. For a frozen moment, they stared at each other. Hunter and prey reversed from what Barrett expected. Then Barrett's hand dropped to his gun, and everything happened at once. Gabe fired first. His shot took Barrett in the gun arm, spinning him and sending his pistol flying. Barrett roared in pain and rage, stumbling back against the boulder. "It's over," Gabe said, keeping his pistol trained on the bigger man. "Call off your men, surrender, face trial. It's the only way this ends without everyone dying." Barrett clutched his bleeding arm, his face twisted with hate. "You think I'll hang? Think they'll actually convict me? I have money, connections, lawyers. I'll be out in a year, and when I am, you'll have nothing. Your land's forfeit, your assets frozen, your reputation destroyed. Best case, you spend the rest of your life in prison. Worst case, and most likely, you hang for murder. Better dead than broken," Barrett snarled. With his good hand, he pulled a knife from his belt. "And if I'm dying, I'm taking you with me," he charged, a wounded bull of a man driven by rage and desperation. Gabe could have shot him, could have ended it cleanly. But something made him holster his pistol and meet the charge. Maybe he needed to prove something, that justice didn't require killing, that strength could be measured in restraint. Or maybe he was just tired of death, tired of bodies and blood and violence as the answer to every problem. Barrett's knife slashed toward his throat. Gabe sidestepped, using the momentum to throw Barrett off balance. They grappled, wrestling on the forest floor among pine needles and stone. Barrett was bigger, heavier, stronger. But Gabe was faster, trained in hand-to-hand combat by the best the cavalry had to offer. He got behind Barrett, locked an arm around the man's throat and squeezed. "Submit," Gabe said through gritted teeth. "Stop fighting." "It's over," Barrett thrashed, trying to break free, but the hold was perfect. Slowly, inevitably, his struggles weakened. His knife fell from nerveless fingers. His body went limp. Gabe held on a moment longer to be sure, then released him. Barrett slumped unconscious but breathing, alive to face justice. Gabe stood, breathing hard, and called out to Barrett's remaining men. "Your boss is down!" "It's finished. Throw down your guns and you'll live to see trial." A long silence. Then one by one, weapons fell to the ground. Men emerged from cover with raised hands, defeated and resigned. Dalton appeared through the trees, rifle ready, and took in the scene. "You actually did it. Took him down alone, not alone. You kept his men occupied. Team effort." Gabe knelt to secure Barrett's hands with rope from his pack. "Get these others cuffed. Then let's head back to town. The real work is just beginning." They returned to town in the afternoon light, a strange procession, Gabe and Dalton riding with 4 prisoners bound and silent, Adelaide driving the wagon with Evelyn and Tobias. Word of their approach spread quickly, and by the time they reached Main Street, half the town had gathered to watch. The crowd's mood was uncertain. Some faces showed relief, others anger, still others simply confusion. For 15 years, these people had lived under Barrett's rule, had prospered or suffered according to his whims. Now that foundation was gone, and they didn't know what would replace it. Dalton locked the prisoners in the jail cells, posting a rotating guard to prevent another escape. Barrett regained consciousness as they secured him, his eyes burning with undiminished hatred. "This changes nothing," he spat at Gabe through the bars. "You think you're a hero? You're just a fool who doesn't understand how the world works. Power always wins, always." "Then you must not have had much power," Gabe replied calmly. "Because you lost." They left Barrett raging in his cell and emerged to find a crowd had formed outside the jail. Mayor Hutchins stood at the front, his face pale with worry. "What happens now?" Hutchins asked. "Barrett controlled everything. The land records, the business licenses, the property deeds. If his transfers were fraudulent, does that mean everyone loses what they've built?" Do we all become criminals for buying stolen property? It was a legitimate question, and Gabe saw the same worry on many faces. These people weren't all conspirators. Most were just trying to make lives in a hard land, trusting that the documents they signed were legal. Evelyn wheeled herself forward, and the crowd fell silent. This was the woman they'd watched suffer in poverty for 15 years, the woman some had pitied and others had ignored. Now she commanded attention simply by being present. "I'm not here to punish innocent people," she said, her voice carrying clearly. "I know most of you bought your property in good faith, built your lives believing everything was legal. I don't want to take that away from you, but the land is legally yours," someone called out. "If the transfers were fraudulent, then we'll work out new transfers. Fair deals, reasonable prices, legal documentation. I want this valley to prosper just like my father did. But I want it built on truth this time, not on murder and theft." Hutchins stepped forward. "And those of us who were part of Barrett's conspiracy, that's for Judge Brooks to decide. I'll testify to what I know, provide evidence of crimes committed, but I'm not looking for revenge. I'm looking for justice." There's a difference. The crowd began to disperse, people talking among themselves, processing this new reality. Not everyone was satisfied, some still loyal to Barrett, others worried about their futures, but the immediate crisis was passing. Adelaide touched Evelyn's shoulder. "That was well said. Your father would be proud. I hope so. I've been trying to make him proud for 15 years. Evelyn looked up at Gabe. "What about you? Will you stay until the legal matters are settled?" Gabe hesitated. The mountains called to him, promised the solitude and peace he'd sought. But looking at Evelyn, at this woman who'd found her strength and voice, he found himself reluctant to leave. "I'll stay until Judge Brooks arrives. Make sure my testimony is on record. After that," he shrugged, "I'm not much for towns and complications. Mountains suit me better. The mountains will wait," Adelaide said. "But we need good men here. Need people who'll stand up for what's right when it would be easier to look away. The valley needs rebuilding, and not just physically. We need to rebuild trust, rebuild community. That takes time and people willing to do the work. I'm not a builder. I'm just a drifter who happened to be in the right place. You're more than that, and you know it." Adelaide's voice carried the authority of a school teacher correcting a stubborn student. "You're exactly the kind of man this valley needs. Someone who can't be bought, can't be intimidated, who sees what needs doing and does it. So stop pretending you're something less than you are." Gabe looked at Evelyn, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Hope maybe, or simple curiosity about what he'd choose." "I'll think about it," he said finally. "No promises. But I'll think about it." That seemed to satisfy them, though he suspected they'd keep pressing. People like Adelaide and Evelyn didn't give up easily once they'd set their minds on something. Over the next week, Red Hollow transformed. Judge Brooks arrived from the territorial capital, a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for fairness and an intolerance for corruption. He spent days reviewing evidence, interviewing witnesses, and slowly unraveling the web of crimes Barrett had woven. Barrett and his main conspirators were bound over for trial on murder charges. Hutchins and several others who'd benefited but hadn't participated directly in the killings received lesser charges: fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. The penalties would be severe but not fatal. The land records were painstakingly reviewed. Evelyn's ownership was confirmed and restored. She offered fair terms to those who'd purchased property innocently, allowing them to buy legitimate titles at reasonable prices. Most accepted. A few, still loyal to Barrett or simply bitter about change, left the territory. Through it all, Gabe remained. He told himself it was just to ensure justice was properly served, that his testimony was accurately recorded. But he knew the truth. He was staying because leaving felt wrong. Because for the first time in 20 years, he'd found something worth staying for. It wasn't romance, though he sensed the potential for that in Evelyn's glances and Adelaide's knowing smiles. It was something simpler and deeper: purpose. The knowledge that what he did mattered, that his presence made a difference. On the 8th day, As Judge Brooks prepared to return to the capital with his prisoners, Evelyn found Gabe on the hotel porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, wheeling herself beside him, just thinking about all that's happened. How a man can go from wanting nothing but solitude to finding himself in the middle of other people's battles, and wondering if maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe hiding in the mountains was just another kind of running away. From what? From responsibility, from connection, from the possibility that I might matter to someone besides myself. He looked at her. "Your offer still stand? About helping rebuild the ranch?" Her face lit with a smile that transformed her features. "It does, if you're sure. It won't be easy. The house needs rebuilding, the land needs work, the cattle operation needs organizing. It's years of hard labor. I've done hard labor before. At least this time it's building something instead of destroying it." He extended his hand. "Partners?" She took it, her grip surprisingly strong. Partners. They sat together as darkness fell. Two people bound by crisis, now choosing to be bound by hope. The valley spread before them, scarred but healing, damaged but not destroyed. Somewhere in those mountains, Gabe's old life waited, simple, solitary, safe. But here, in this imperfect town with its complicated people and messy problems, he'd found something better. He'd found a reason to stay. 6 months passed like water through fingers, quick when you looked away, substantial when you added it all up. The valley changed in that time, transformed from a place built on secrets and violence into something resembling the community Richard Cross had once envisioned. The New Cross ranch house rose on the same foundation, where the old one had burned. Not as grand as the original, but solid and welcoming, with wide porches and rooms designed for a woman in a wheelchair to navigate easily. Gabe had learned carpentry alongside ranch work, his hands growing calloused from hammer and sore as much as from reins and rope. The cattle operation expanded under careful management. Workers who'd fled under Barrett's tyranny returned, drawn by fair wages and honest treatment. The valley prospered, but differently now. Wealth spread more evenly. Success measured not just in land and gold, but in community and connection. Gabe found himself becoming part of that community in ways he'd never expected. People nodded to him on the street, asked his opinion on town matters, invited him to church socials and barn raisings. He was no longer the mysterious mountain man, but simply Gabe, Evelyn's partner in rebuilding the Cross legacy. On a warm spring morning, he stood on the new ranch house porch, watching the sun climb over the eastern peaks. The view was breathtaking, miles of rolling grassland dotted with cattle, mountains framing the horizon, sky so blue it hurt to look at. Beautiful, isn't it? Evelyn wheeled herself out to join him, coffee in hand. She looked different now, stronger, more vibrant. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes was gone, replaced by quiet confidence. "It is. Your father chose well when he settled here. He always said the land speaks to you if you listen. Tells you where to build, where to plant, where to just leave alone and let it be wild." She handed him the coffee cup. "I think he'd approve of what we've done." "Hope so. I'm still learning. Never ran a ranch before, never managed workers, never had to think about quarterly profits and long-term planning. You're doing fine. Better than fine. The men respect you, the operation's profitable, and you haven't shot anyone in months. I'd call that success," he smiled. "Set your bar low enough, anything looks good. I set my bar exactly where it should be, and you clear it every day." She paused, looking out at the valley. "Thank you, Gabe, for staying, for helping build this. You could have left any time, gone back to your mountains, but you stayed. Mountains will always be there. This," he gestured at the ranch, the valley, the community below. "This needed doing, and I needed to be part of something that mattered." Turns out those two needs lined up nicely. Adelaide appeared in the doorway, flour dusting her apron. She'd moved to the ranch permanently, serving as housekeeper and cook, though everyone knew she was really there to keep Evelyn company and make sure Gabe didn't revert to bachelor habits. "Breakfast in 10 minutes, she announced. "And Tobias is riding up the trail. Looks urgent." They waited while Tobias approached, his horse lathered from hard riding. He dismounted quickly, his face grave. "News from the territorial capital," he said without preamble. "Barrett's trial concluded yesterday. Guilty on all counts: murder, fraud, conspiracy. Sentenced to hang next month." Evelyn's face remained composed, but Gabe saw her hands tighten on the wheelchair arms. "And the others?" "Varied sentences. Hutchins got 10 years for fraud and conspiracy. Dalton was acquitted. Jury believed he was coerced and that he tried to make amends at the end. Some of the smaller players got fines and probation. Judge Brooks was thorough. Made sure everyone faced consequences proportionate to their crimes. "It's over then," Evelyn said quietly. "Truly over. The legal part, yes. The healing part," Tobias shrugged. "That takes longer. But it started. That's what matters." They invited him to breakfast, and the four of them sat around the new table in the new house, eating Adelaide's cooking and talking about plans for the season ahead. Spring planting, cattle breeding, fence repair, the mundane tasks of ranch life that somehow felt profound when you were building something lasting. After Tobias left, Gabe saddled his horse and rode out to check the northern pastures. The work was necessary, but he also needed solitude to process everything. Barrett's conviction should have felt like closure, like the final page of a difficult chapter. Instead, it just felt sad. A man's life wasted on greed and violence, ending on a gallows because he couldn't see that enough was enough. He was riding back as sunset painted the sky when he spotted Evelyn's wheelchair on the hilltop overlooking the valley. She'd started coming here in the evenings to the spot where her parents were buried, where 3 simple crosses marked the graves of Richard and Margaret Cross and, symbolically, the daughter they'd lost in the fire. Gabe approached quietly, not wanting to intrude, but she heard his horse and turned. "Join me?" she asked. He dismounted and sat on the grass beside her wheelchair. Below them, the valley glowed in golden light. Smoke rose from chimneys in Red Hollow. Cattle grazed in distant pastures. Life continuing, ordinary and precious. "I came here every week for 15 years, Evelyn said. "Sat here and talked to them, told them about my day, about the town, about the injustice of it all. For so long, all I had to report was how their killers prospered while I suffered. And now? Now I can tell them we won, that justice prevailed, that their legacy is restored, that the valley they built is thriving again. I can tell them I'm happy." She looked at him. "I can tell them I found someone who stood up when no one else would, who gave me back my voice and my strength. Someone who stayed." Gabe felt his throat tighten. "I'm no hero, Evelyn. Just a man who did what needed doing. That's exactly what a hero is. Not someone who seeks glory, but someone who does what's right because it needs doing. My father would have liked you, would have recognized a kindred spirit." They sat in companionable silence as the sun touched the horizon. Gabe thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago, isolated, haunted, convinced that the only peace lay in solitude. That man felt like a stranger now, someone who'd been running from life instead of toward it. "Thank you," he said finally. "For what?" "For giving me a reason to stop running. For showing me that standing up for something is better than standing apart from everything. For letting me be part of this." Evelyn reached out and took his hand. "Thank you for being the kind of man worth standing beside." As darkness fell, they remained on the hilltop. 2 people bound together by crisis, now choosing to be bound by something deeper: respect, partnership, and the quiet knowledge that some fights are worth fighting not for what you gain, but for what you become in the fighting. The mountains still called to Gabe sometimes, whispered promises of simplicity and solitude. But the valley called louder, called with the voices of people who needed him, work that mattered, a life that meant something beyond mere survival. He'd come to Red Hollow as a stranger, intending to buy supplies and leave. Instead, he'd found a home, not in the physical sense, though the ranch was beautiful and the work satisfying, but in the deeper sense of finding a place where he belonged, where his presence made a difference, where he could finally look in the mirror and see a man worthy of respect. The compass in his vest pocket still pointed true north, but north had taken on new meaning. It wasn't a direction to escape toward anymore. It was a principle to live by: honesty, courage, justice, standing up when it mattered. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stand up when everyone else sits down. And sometimes it's knowing when someone stood up for you and standing even taller because of it. Gabe Hunter had learned both lessons, and in learning them, he'd found what he'd been seeking in those mountains all along. He'd found peace. Not the peace of isolation, but the deeper peace of purpose. The knowledge that his life mattered, that his choices had consequences, that he'd made the world slightly better by being in it. That was enough. More than enough. As they rode back to the ranch under emerging stars, Gabe looked at the valley spread before them, scarred but healing, damaged but not destroyed, alive with possibility. This was his home now. These were his people. This was his fight, and he wouldn't trade it for all the solitude in the world. The end.